Does an archaeological city in central Israel that was excavated not that long ago prove the biblical depiction of the kingdom of David?
Archaeologists just claimed they found King David's lost palace, and what they pulled out of the ground is stunning. A massive royal complex, 10,000 square feet, buried on a hilltop in Israel for 3,000 years, overlooking the exact valley where the Bible says David killed Goliath. The walls are 10 feet thick, built from stones weighing several tons each, constructed with a level of engineering that only a powerful centralized kingdom could achieve. Professor Yosef Garfinkel of Hebrew University led the excavation. And when the radiocarbon dates came back, they pointed to one period and one period only, the exact decades when King David was supposed to have reigned. For over a century, mainstream scholars called David a myth, a legend, a fictional king invented by ancient writers. They said no palace would ever be found because there was no king to build one. They were wrong, and the evidence doesn't just challenge their position, it demolishes it. The man, they said, never existed. For decades, powerful voices in the academic world wanted King David erased from history, not questioned, not debated, erased. A group of scholars known as biblical minimalists had taken control of the conversation. Their position was blunt. The great United Kingdom described in the Bible, the empire of David and Solomon stretching from Egypt to Mesopotamia, was a fantasy.
So when we talk about the biblical significance of this site, it's becoming beyond exciting. We're standing on stones that are dated to the time of King David.
A fabrication, a heroic origin story invented centuries after the fact by writers trying to manufacture a glorious past for their people. And get this, their argument hit hard because it was so simple. If David was a powerful king, where was the proof? Where were the palaces, the administrative buildings, the monuments and royal inscriptions that every other ancient ruler left behind? Every pharaoh carved his name into stone. Every Assyrian king erected victory monuments, but David, nothing. Not a single confirmed structure, not one royal inscription with his name on it. Teams from Britain, France, Germany, and Israel had spent over 100 years excavating Jerusalem. They dug through layer after layer of ancient occupation, Babylonian destruction layers, Persian-era rebuilding, Hellenistic renovations, Roman construction. But from the 10th century BCE, the exact period when David was supposed to have reigned, almost nothing turned up. Small houses, modest structures, evidence of a simple farming society struggling to survive in the Judean highlands. Not a kingdom, not even close. The minimalists declared victory, and they were loud about it. David, if he existed at all, was nothing more than a local warlord, a petty chief whose legend had been inflated beyond recognition.
So here we have the city of David modern day.
Okay.
You can see the Temple Mount. The city of David is beneath this hilltop right over here.
And
so if you peel away this hilltop and go back in time, it would have looked like this.
Okay.
Textbooks were rewritten, documentaries were produced. The story of King David was shelved alongside other ancient legends, interesting literature that had nothing to do with actual history. Here's the catch. There was a massive problem with that conclusion, a problem the minimalists refused to acknowledge. Jerusalem is one of the most continuously inhabited cities in human history, built, destroyed, rebuilt, and transformed dozens of times over 3,000 years. Every conqueror, Babylonians, Romans, Crusaders, Ottomans, tore down what came before and stacked something new on top of it. Finding 10th century BCE evidence in Jerusalem is like trying to find the foundation of the first house ever built in Manhattan. The evidence isn't gone, it's buried under 3 millennia of demolition and construction. But the minimalists didn't care. No palaces meant no kings. Case closed. Except it wasn't closed, not even close, because a few archaeologists refused to accept that argument. And what they were about to find would turn the entire debate upside down. If discoveries like this fascinate you, hit subscribe right now, because what they found next is going to blow your mind. The hilltop. Nobody bothered to dig. Professor Garfinkel and a small group of colleagues had a theory. If David was truly a powerful king, he wouldn't have built only in Jerusalem. He would have established fortified positions throughout his kingdom, especially along its most vulnerable borders. Military outposts to guard the approaches to his capital. And those outlying sites, unlike Jerusalem, might have been abandoned and left untouched for thousands of years, sealed in time, waiting. That reasoning brought Garfinkel to a hilltop called Khirbet Qeiyafa, about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. The site overlooks the Elah Valley, a natural corridor between the coastal plain and the hill country of Judah. According to the Bible, this valley was where the young David killed the giant Goliath. According to military strategy, it was exactly where a king would build a fortress to protect his realm. Previous surveys had noted ancient ruins on the hilltop. Nobody had bothered to conduct serious excavations. The site looked like countless others, unexcavated tells scattered across the region. An unpromising pile of rocks baking in the sun that probably contained nothing worth the effort. Local Bedouins had grazed sheep across it for centuries without a second glance. When Garfinkel's team started digging in 2007, expectations were low. A small, fortified village, some pottery sherds, a few artifacts worth publishing in a journal that maybe 200 people would read. But here's the deal. What came out of that ground was not a village, not even close. The first thing they hit was the wall, not a simple stone barrier like the ones found around small settlements. A massive fortification built from enormous stones weighing several tons each. The wall was over 10 feet thick in places, constructed using engineering techniques that required specialized architectural knowledge and enormous amounts of organized labor. Think about that for a second. This was not something a tribal chief builds with a few dozen followers. This required hundreds of workers operating under central command. Architects who understood load-bearing construction, logistics officers coordinating the quarrying, transportation, and precise placement of massive stone blocks. Professor Garfinkel later described the moment the scale became clear. He had spent years being told that nothing like this could exist from the 10th century BCE. Now he was standing inside it. As excavation continued, the scope kept expanding. This wasn't an outpost. It was a planned city, over 6 acres, surrounded by fortification walls stretching more than 2,000 feet. The construction showed unified planning. The entire complex had been designed and built as a single project, not something that grew organically over generations. Someone with enormous resources and absolute authority had ordered this city into existence. All at once, then came the dating. Garfinkel's team sent samples of organic material found beneath the floor levels to multiple independent laboratories for radiocarbon analysis. Olive pits, grain, charcoal from ancient cooking fires. The samples were tested separately to guarantee accuracy. Because Garfinkel knew these results would be controversial, the dates came back. 10th century BCE, not the 9th, not the 8th. The 10th, the exact decades when David was supposed to have reigned. Hard science, multiple labs, no ambiguity. For the first time in over 100 years of excavation, someone had found a major fortified site from precisely the right period to correspond with the biblical United Monarchy. The minimalists had built their entire case on the claim that no such sites existed. That claim had just been blown apart, but the walls were only the warm-up. What Garfinkel's team found next made the walls look like a footnote. The city with 2 gates. As the team cleared debris from the perimeter, they uncovered something that had never been documented at any site in the entire region. The city had 2 gates. Now, that might sound like a minor architectural detail. It's not. It changes everything. Gates are the weak point of any fortification. They're where enemies concentrate their attacks. Every other city from this period had a single gate, heavily fortified, easy to defend. Building 2 gates doubles your vulnerability. No military commander does that without a very specific strategic reason. Garfinkel went to the biblical texts. In the book of Samuel, there's a reference to a city called Sha'arayim. The name translates literally as 2 gates. Scholars had debated for centuries whether Sha'arayim was a real place or a symbolic invention. Now, here's where it gets wild. Here was a city from exactly the right time period, in exactly the right location, with exactly the architectural feature that would explain that ancient name. The city mentioned in the Bible as existing during David's reign had been found, and it was built on a scale that only a powerful central government could achieve. The gates themselves revealed extraordinary engineering. They were integrated into a casemate wall system, a double wall with chambers built into the space between. These chambers served as storage space, soldiers' quarters, and structural reinforcement simultaneously. During a siege, the chambers could be filled with rubble to create an even thicker barrier against battering rams. During peacetime, they functioned as barracks and supply rooms. You don't build casemate walls by accident. You don't stumble into that design. You build them because you have trained military architects who understand siege warfare and a government with the resources to execute complex fortification projects across an entire territory. Inside the gate areas, the team found stone benches arranged in a deliberate pattern, matching descriptions in ancient texts of how city elders gathered to conduct official business, settle disputes, and administer royal justice. These gates weren't just defensive structures. They were administrative centers, places where the king's authority was exercised through appointed officials. Evidence of governance, evidence of bureaucracy, evidence of exactly the organized state the minimalists swore never existed. And this is the part nobody expected. The pottery was about to deliver the knockout blow. The pottery that proved a kingdom. As excavations expanded, Garfinkel's team recovered hundreds of ceramic vessels from the ruins, storage jars, cooking pots, serving dishes, the everyday items that reveal how people actually lived. But these vessels were different. Garfinkel noticed it immediately. They weren't handmade by individual families, each piece showing unique characteristics. They were standardized, mass-produced, made according to exact specifications that stayed consistent across the entire site. Stay with me here, because this detail is more explosive than it sounds. Standardized pottery production requires centralized manufacturing, workshops operating under quality control, distribution systems moving finished products from producers to users across a territory. Small villages produce varied individual pottery. Kingdoms produce standardized goods. Khirbet Keyyafa was producing kingdom-level goods, full stop. But wait, it gets better. Many of the storage jars had symbols pressed into their handles before firing, not random decorations, administrative marks, ancient versions of official government stamps indicating that the contents of these vessels belonged to the state. This is direct evidence of taxation. Someone was collecting agricultural surplus from the surrounding population, storing it in officially marked containers, and maintaining it in government warehouses. You cannot have taxation without a tax collector. You cannot have tax collectors without a king. Game over for the minimalist position? Not yet. There was more. The dietary evidence hit just as hard. Archaeological. Sites accumulate food waste over time, and the bones left behind reveal exactly what the inhabitants ate. At Khirbet Keyyafa, the team found bones from cattle, sheep, and goats, standard domesticated animals. Here's the catch. What they did not find was devastating for the skeptics. There were no pig bones, not a single one. This absence is diagnostic. Nearby sites from the same period, particularly Philistine settlements on the coastal plain, contain abundant pig remains. The Philistines ate pork regularly. But whoever lived at Khirbet Keyyafa followed strict dietary restrictions, matching the practices described in biblical texts as characteristic of the people of Judah. This wasn't a Philistine outpost. This wasn't a Canaanite city. This was a settlement whose inhabitants followed the customs of David's people. Then came the inscription, and Professor Garfinkel's reaction told the whole story. In one of the rooms near the gate, excavators carefully lifted a pottery, fragment from the debris, an ostracon with writing on it. Not random scratches, not merchant tallies, an organized text written in an early form of the Hebrew alphabet. The content referenced protecting the poor, the widow, the orphan, themes echoing directly through the biblical prophetic tradition. Garfinkel held it in his hands and understood what he was looking at. This single fragment of pottery was about to obliterate one of the minimalists' strongest arguments. Garfinkel called it one of the most significant finds of his career, and he wasn't exaggerating. The minimalists had insisted that writing was rare or non-existent in 10th century BCE Judah. They had claimed the sophisticated literature of the Bible could not have been produced by an essentially illiterate society. Here was physical proof that scribes were composing texts about social justice at a military border outpost 3,000 years ago. If they were writing at the frontier, what were they producing in the capital? The technology reinforced everything. Iron tools and weapons appeared throughout the excavation. Blades, agricultural implements, military hardware. Iron was the cutting-edge technology of the age, requiring specialized smelting knowledge and closely guarded forging techniques. The temperatures needed to work iron far exceeded those for bronze. Finding iron implements at a border fortress proved the kingdom had access to advanced metallurgy and could equip even its outlying installations with the best available equipment. This was not a backward society surviving on Bronze Age scraps. This was a wealthy, technologically sophisticated kingdom, projecting resources far beyond its capital. And the biggest discovery was still waiting at the top of the hill: the palace. Everything Garfinkel's team had uncovered pointed towards centralized royal authority. The massive walls, the twin gates, the standardized pottery, the government tax stamps, the Hebrew inscription, the iron, and metallurgy. But the minimalists still had one card left. They could argue this was a well-organized local community, an anomaly, not proof of a great kingdom. That argument died the moment the excavators reached the summit. At the highest point of the hill, positioned to dominate the entire city and visible for miles across the Ala Valley below, they uncovered a massive building unlike anything else in the settlement. 10,000 square feet, enormous for any building from 3,000 years ago. Larger than most modern homes, and this was constructed with hand-cut stone blocks on a remote hilltop 30 centuries before heavy machinery existed. The walls were built from carefully dressed stones, not the rough field stones used in ordinary houses. The rooms were large and open, designed for public functions, not private domestic life. The craftsmanship was deliberate, precise, built to impress. From the palace's elevated position, you could see the full sweep of the Ala Valley where David reportedly faced Goliath, the same valley this entire fortress was built to control. Professor Garfinkel stood in the main chamber and recognized exactly what he was looking at. This was a palace, not a house, not a warehouse, not a temple. A royal administrative building placed at the highest point of a fortified city to project power and authority across the landscape. Its position matched descriptions in the biblical texts of how royal buildings were situated in relation to city gates and defensive walls. Whoever designed this city understood how kings built. The palace layout confirmed its function: large reception areas for conducting official business and receiving visitors, smaller chambers serving as administrative offices, storage facilities integrated into the complex, allowing taxed goods to be collected and distributed from the seat of local power. This was a provincial government center, an extension of royal authority into a vital border region. And get this, the implications demolished every remaining skeptical argument. If this level of sophisticated construction existed at a border outpost, what existed in Jerusalem itself? The minimalists had pointed to the absence of monumental architecture in Jerusalem as their ultimate proof. But Khirbet Qeiyafa proved the kingdom could build monumental architecture. It proved 10th century BCE. Judah had the organizational capacity, the technological skill, and the administrative sophistication to create exactly the structures the Bible describes. The absence in Jerusalem was a preservation problem, not evidence of fiction. A time capsule. The city's lifespan delivered one final devastating blow. Analysis of the archaeological layers showed Khirbet Qeiyafa was occupied for roughly 40 to 50 years, then violently destroyed and abandoned. Never rebuilt, never reoccupied. The destruction layer sealed everything beneath it like a time capsule, preserving the 10th century occupation with extraordinary clarity. That timeline matched the biblical account with chilling precision. David and Solomon's combined reigns covered approximately 80 years. A border fortress built during their era and destroyed shortly after would look exactly like what Garfinkel found. The destruction itself carried historical weight. Walls were toppled, buildings were burned, ash layers covered the floors. This city didn't fade away peacefully. It didn't decline over generations. It was conquered in a single violent assault. Historical records indicate the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak launched a military campaign through the region approximately 40 years after the traditional dating of David's reign. His army swept through the lowlands of Judah, systematically destroying fortified positions along the way. A fortress guarding the primary approach to Jerusalem would have been a prime target, one of the first positions Shishak's forces would have needed to neutralize before advancing on the capital. The archaeological evidence of destruction aligned with the historical record. The dates matched, the geography matched, the violence matched. Kingdom unearthed. The discoveries at Khirbet Qeiyafa didn't prove every word of the Bible is literally accurate. Archaeology rarely delivers that kind of confirmation for any ancient text. Specific debates about details and timelines will continue, but what Garfinkel's excavation accomplished was far more significant than settling minor disputes. It destroyed the central argument of the minimalist position, completely, permanently. Their claim, repeated in journals and classrooms for decades, was simple. No powerful kingdom existed in 10th century B.C.E. Judah because no evidence had ever been found. Absence of evidence was evidence of absence. No palaces meant no kings. The silence of the dirt meant the Bible was fiction. Now the dirt was screaming. Massive walls, standardized pottery, government tax stamps, Hebrew inscriptions, a 10,000 square foot royal palace overlooking a strategic valley. Evidence that could only be explained by a centralized, powerful, administratively sophisticated state, operating exactly when and where the Bible placed David's kingdom. The academic response revealed more about institutional pride than scholarly integrity. Some researchers accepted the evidence and revised their positions. Professor Aaron Meir of Bar Ilan University acknowledged the findings demanded serious reconsideration of minimalist timelines. That took intellectual courage. Others scrambled. They suggested the Philistines built the fortress, or some unknown Canaanite city-state. Anyone other than Judah. Because admitting Judah built it meant admitting 3 decades of confident declarations were wrong. Those alternative explanations collapsed immediately. No pig bones eliminated the Philistines. Pottery styles matched Judahite highland. Traditions, not coastal manufacturing. The inscription used early Hebrew script, not Philistine or Canaanite writing systems. Every single piece of evidence pointed where Garfinkel said it did. A fortified city built by the Kingdom of Judah during the reign of King David. More sites have emerged since. Khirbet al-Rai, just a few miles from Qeiyafa, shows the same characteristics. Massive fortifications, standardized pottery, evidence of centralized planning. So does Beth Shemesh. Each new excavation reveals the identical pattern. Kingdom-scale construction requiring centralized resources, government-controlled production systems, and administrative infrastructure that only an organized state could provide. The pattern is consistent across multiple independent locations spanning the borders of what the Bible calls David's territory. The 10th century B.C.E. wasn't a dark age of scattered villages. It was the era of a powerful, organized kingdom operating across the Judean highlands, building fortresses, collecting taxes, maintaining scribes, and projecting military power exactly as the biblical texts describe. The scholars who spent careers calling David a myth have largely gone silent. Their books sit on library shelves, but their conclusions have been overrun by stones and pottery and bones telling a very different story. Very few have publicly admitted how thoroughly wrong they were. And here's the part that should keep every historian awake at night. 95% of Khirbet Qeiyafa remains unexcavated. Entire wings of the palace complex are still underground. Additional structures, artifacts, and inscriptions could be waiting inches below the surface. And across the Judean highlands, dozens of untouched tells sit sealed in time, each one a potential time capsule from the age of David. The ground has barely begun to talk. So, here's the question. Do you think we're looking at King David's actual kingdom? Or is this just the beginning of something even bigger than anyone imagined? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time, because the next discovery could change everything, and you'll want to be here when it drops.